There was silence, a deep silence, as if the whole earth was breathing again for the first time. The ark rested on the slopes of Mount Ararat, shrouded in clouds, and the sound of receding waters still echoed in the distance. The ancient world was gone. Everything had been taken away: cities, voices, trails, memories. What remained now was a new beginning, new ground to be trodden. Noah, now advanced in years, gazed reverently at the still damp horizon, covered in morning mist. His feet touched the solid ground with a mixture of gratitude and awe. At his side, his wife, his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and his daughters-in-law looked around, marveling at the vastness of what was being reborn before them. Each step was a new beginning, each seed carried promise. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. There, on that ground drenched with hope, Noah built an altar. The simple gesture was his way of giving thanks, of acknowledging the hand that had saved them. God then sealed a covenant with him. He would never again destroy the earth with a flood, and the rainbow that shone in the clouds was the sign of that promise. A rainbow of colors and hope, marking the sky as an eternal reminder. Life after the flood was made up of new and old tasks. They needed to plant, build, tame the fields, and care for the animals. But more than anything, they needed to rediscover themselves as a family. The days were long but peaceful, and as Noah's children settled down, their homes began to take shape. New generations would come from there. New stories would be written on that land washed by the waters. There were no more crowds, but there was purpose. There were no cities, but there was unity. Each member of that small community carried within themselves a portion of the responsibility to populate the earth and keep alive obedience to the Creator. There was reverence and memory among them, memory of all that had been lost, and reverence for all that God had restored. The new land was not just a place, it was a chance, an opportunity to start over. And it was in this environment of new beginnings that the paths of Shem, Ham, and Japheth began to diverge, paths that would soon reveal the heart of each one. Before continuing, I want to invite you to comment on which city or country you are watching from. Let's see how far this message is reaching. Shem, Ham, and Japheth walked through the mountains and valleys of that renewed world with attentive eyes and awakened hearts. They had witnessed God's judgment and were now heirs to a great responsibility to continue the human race. No longer as simple children, but as patriarchs of new lineages. Each of them carried within themselves different marks from the journey. Shem, the most contemplative, gazed at the sky and seemed to absorb the signs of the divine covenant more deeply. Ham, restless, was active, curious, involved in building and exploring. Japheth was conciliatory, serene, someone who sought harmony in the small gestures of everyday life. They were brothers, sons of the same man, but with different natures. God's blessing on Noah extended to his sons. They heard from their father the instructions given by the Creator: be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. It was not just a call to have offspring, but to establish a new way of living, governing, and relating to God and others. The mission was sacred. As the days passed, they began to separate, taking their own paths. Tents were set up in different places as families grew, and with them, customs, decisions, and spiritual directions also took their own paths. Time did not erase what they had seen, but human hearts, even after the judgment, still carried the freedom to choose. Noah watched his children with a mixture of hope and caution. He knew that a new beginning would not, in itself, guarantee a straight path. So he continued to pass on stories, warnings, and words of wisdom. A father's blessing was more than a wish. It was a direction, a bridge between heaven and earth. And as Noah's sons took their places in history, the seed planted in that new world grew silently. A legacy was being shaped. There were no visible conflicts yet, but the character traits of each one were beginning to emerge. and soon their actions would speak louder than words. If this content is touching your heart, you can support this project by donating any amount by clicking on the Thanks a Lot button. Your support helps me continue telling these stories with dedication. Time passed. The lands around Mount Ararat became fertile and welcoming. The fields, once silent, now flourished under the diligent care of those who had survived the flood. Noah, a man of the land since his earliest days, returned to what he knew best: farming. With skilled hands and a calm spirit, he prepared the soil and planted a vineyard. The vineyard was a symbol of new beginnings. Each sprouting seedling carried hope, and the process, though slow, was almost therapeutic for this man who carried so much of ancient humanity in his memory. He had seen the past, lived through the judgment, and now, among the rows of vines, he also saw the future. The soil responded, the fruits appeared, and the earth smiled again. When harvest time came, Noah picked ripe, sweet, abundant grapes. With them, he produced wine, the natural fruit of fermentation, part of the agricultural culture of his time. It was common in past generations, and now it was reappearing in that renewed world. Wine represented celebration, sustenance, and even medicine. But it also required balance, for in excess, it could reveal weaknesses. On one of those peaceful days, Noah drank the wine he had prepared. He felt safe, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, in a world without the pressures of the past. But perhaps due to fatigue, or perhaps due to a lack of vigilance, he drank more than he should have. His aging body could not withstand it. Drunkenness overtook him, and without realizing it, he undressed and fell asleep inside his tent. There, far from everyone's eyes, Noah slept, vulnerable, defenseless. It was an intimate, personal moment in which human weakness manifested itself in someone who had been for so long an example of faith and obedience. But even the righteous have days when they stumble. That moment, which could have gone unnoticed, would be the starting point of a gesture that would forever mark the destiny of one of the lineages of the new humanity. The wine had been harvested with joy, but soon it would become a silent witness to a serious choice made by one of the sons. Cam was walking around the camp when he noticed something unusual in his father's tent. The side curtain was half open, and an eerie silence hung in the air. Driven by curiosity, he approached. As he peeked inside, he was met with an unexpected scene. Noah, lying drunk and naked. There, before that image, Cam had a choice. He could have looked away, discreetly closed the tent flap, and preserved the dignity of the man who had been instrumental in saving his life. But something inside him took a different turn. He didn't just see, he decided to tell. He hurried out and reported what had happened to his brothers, Shem and Japheth. There is no sign of embarrassment or regret in his words. The tone was one of scorn. His gesture revealed something profound, a lack of fear, a heart incapable of protecting what should be sacred. Cam did not mock openly, but his behavior was enough to expose his father to contempt. Worse, it tarnished the respect that surrounded Noah within the family. The act was not just a mistake, it was a revelation. In the new land, in the midst of a new beginning, Cam's heart showed a trait that might have gone unnoticed in ordinary times. But at that moment it became clear there was a dangerous lightness in him when it came to the honor due to his father. He saw and exposed what he should have protected and silenced. That attitude became a dividing line. Noah's mistake, though obvious, was human. But Cam's gesture revealed something more, contempt masked by indifference, a disrespect that needed no shouting, for it was hidden between the lines of a malicious choice. Shem and Japheth, upon hearing the account, realized the gravity of the situation. Their hearts reacted differently. Where Cam saw an opportunity for mockery, they saw a need for reparation. And soon, their actions would show how much honor and respect still had a place in that newly rebuilt world. Upon hearing Cam's words, Shem and Japheth looked at each other. They didn't say much, but the silence between them spoke volumes. There was something sacred that needed to be restored, not with speeches or reprimands, but with actions. They did not discuss their father's mistake, nor did they make any comments. Instead, they decided to act with reverence. They took a cloak. Not just any piece of cloth, but something that could worthily cover Noah's exposed nakedness. They held the cloak carefully and together walked backwards to the tent. Their steps were slow and deliberate. They did not look back. They did not allow their eyes to touch their father's shame. On the contrary, they protected with their gestures what human weakness had left vulnerable. The image of those two brothers entering the tent with their backs turned was one of silent honor, a reverence that spoke louder than any words. They covered their father, without accusations, without irony, without rebellion. It was as if in that gesture they were saying, "This man, even though he is flawed, is still worthy of respect." Shem and Japheth not only restored Noah's dignity, they restored the nobility of their own souls. In times when exposing the mistakes of others may seem like a sign of strength, they showed that true strength lies in protecting, honoring, and preserving what is sacred, even when no one else sees it. The cloak spread over Noah was not just a piece of cloth. It was a symbol of compassion. It was the bridge between the weakness of a father and the maturity of sons who knew when to remain silent and when to cover. It was the cloak of honor. When they left the tent, they did not need to say what they had done. Their actions spoke for themselves. The gesture of both would be remembered not only as a respectful attitude, but as a milestone of fear of God and family authority. And while Noah still slept, now wrapped in the cloak brought with respect, the sky silently witnessed the difference between two paths, that of contempt and that of honor. Soon, awakening would reveal consequences that would span generations. The morning light began to filter through the opening of the tent. The first sounds of the camp brought the peaceful rhythm of another day. Inside the tent, Noah slowly awoke. His thoughts were cloudy, his senses vague, as if the weight of the previous night still rested on his shoulders. Gradually his memory returned, the taste of wine, his body relaxed beyond the limit, the deep sleep. But something was different. He felt the touch of fabric on him, a cloak, and then he understood. Someone had covered him. Someone had been there, silently, respecting what had been exposed by his own fragility. Noah sat up with difficulty, and as the minutes passed, the fragments of reality began to come together. It was then that he knew. Shem, his son, had seen him. And more than that, he had gone out and told his brothers, exposing his condition. The news reached Noah's ears bluntly, but it was enough for him to understand everything. The pain did not come only from embarrassment. It came from the attitude of a son who had chosen exposure over protection, mockery over respect. It was not just a family incident, it was a portrait of the heart. And Noah, a man of discernment and faith, understood what that meant. Shem had not only sinned against him, but against the principle of honor that sustained the new order of the earth. The tears were not mentioned, but they could have been. A father is not saddened only by what is done, but by what it reveals. And while the pain still throbbed in his spirit, Noah thought of the other two. Shem and Japheth in silence had done what was right. They had protected, honored, and guarded. It was time to speak, not in anger, but in authority. What had happened needed to be sealed with words that would echo beyond that generation. There would be blessing, there would be curse, and those words, spoken by Noah, would carry the weight of what had been planted by each son, whether with contempt or with honor. Noah stood up, calm but with a heavy heart. He knew that words spoken by a father, especially at times like this, carried eternal weight. It wasn't just an emotional reaction. It was the awareness of a legacy that needed to be protected and at the same time corrected. Before his family, he opened his lips and declared something that surprised everyone. He did not directly curse Ham, the son who had dishonored him. Instead, his eyes turned to Canaan. Ham's son. And with a firm voice he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers." At that moment, the future of a lineage was sealed. Canaan's name came to carry the weight of a consequence that was not just about an isolated act, but about a spirit revealed. Ham had failed to expose his father. Canaan would inherit the implications of that irreverent heart. It was more than justice. It was the reflection of a choice that would spill over into generations. Noah's words echoed among those present. They were not shouted, but they weighed like a hammer on stone. In that new land, where everything was starting from scratch, there was an urgent need to establish foundations, and honor for authority was one of them. Cam would lose through his son his place of prominence among his brothers. The curse on Canaan was not just a punishment, it was a warning. Ham's lineage, marked by irreverence, would face servitude, challenges, and distance from the promised blessing. The gesture of a wounded father became prophecy, and over time, that word would be fulfilled in a visible way in the history of the peoples descended from Canaan. Still, Noah did not speak with hatred. His voice, though firm, carried the lament of a father who wanted more. But the words could not be taken back, and like seeds thrown to the wind, they would follow their course. While Ham remained silent, Shem and Japheth listened attentively. They knew they were facing something greater than a family incident. It was a spiritual declaration about honor and contempt, about legacy and responsibility. After the curse on Canaan, Noah turned to his other two sons. His eyes rested first on Shem. There was a quietness about him that conveyed reverence, a silent zeal that manifested itself clearly in that delicate moment. Noah then blessed him. "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." The blessing on Shem was not only a reward for his respect for his father, but a spiritual confirmation. God would be called the God of Shem, a title that would span generations. It was through Shem's lineage that Abraham, the patriarchs, the prophets, and the Messiah himself would come. Shem would become the spiritual trunk of the faith. His honor toward his father was aligned with his honor toward God himself. Next, Noah turned to Japheth. His gesture, though different from Shem's, was also worthy. Japheth had walked backward, holding up his brother's cloak. He had participated in the gesture of respect, and therefore would also receive a word of blessing. May God extend Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. The blessing on Japheth was one of expansion. His descendants would occupy vast regions, grow in number, and prosper in knowledge. But the phrase, "and let him dwell in the tents of Shem," indicated something profound. Japheth would find spiritual shelter in the blessed lineage of Shem. His blessing would be complete when he united with the heritage of faith. Both of Noah's statements showed that the sons' actions in the face of their father's weakness revealed their destinies. A simple moment, a tent, a cloak, a sleeping father, became the setting for decisions that would define the course of entire peoples. Noah's words ended more than a family episode. They were foundations. In the new land, every gesture planted seeds. Contempt produced servitude, honor produced blessing, and the reverent silence of two brothers would become an eternal example of how discreet attitudes carry great promises. On that day, the voices of blessing and curse had been uttered. There was nothing more to say. All that remained was to live and see in time how each word spoken would bear fruit among the children of the children. Time ran its course. Noah's sons spread across the earth, forming peoples, cultures, and nations. The words spoken that morning in the shade of the tent were not forgotten. They echoed from generation to generation like a continuous whisper in the oral traditions of their descendants. The story of Ham, Shem, and Japheth was told not as a fable, but as a milestone, a reminder that seemingly small actions, such as looking or averting one's gaze, exposing or protecting, could have lasting consequences. Each people knew where they came from. Each nation carried with it the trace of what had been planted in the early days of the new earth. The descendants of Canaan would face conflicts, wars, and servitude. Peoples such as the Jebusites, the Amorites, and the Canaanites, all descended from his lineage, would come into conflict with the descendants of Shem, especially with the children of Israel. The echoes of the curse became visible over the centuries, not as divine vengeance, but as a reflection of a seed poorly sown in the past. The lineage of Shem, on the other hand, flourished toward the divine plan. From it came Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David, the prophets, and finally Jesus, the promised Messiah, all because one son honored his father at a time when it would have been easier to simply ignore or judge him. And what of Japheth? His descendants spread to the north and west, and over time, their lands expanded as Noah had prophesied. His legacy grew, but whenever he sought refuge in the spiritual promises of Shem, he found something deeper than expansion. He found meaning. The story of Noah and his sons has lived on through the centuries, not only as a record, but as a lesson. It has remained alive in songs, in sacred texts, in conversations around the fire, in teachings passed down from father to son. It was a reminder: God sees the heart, and the gestures we make in private, behind the scenes of life, can touch generations yet to be born. Noah's tent was dismantled over time. His bones rested in the ground, but his memory and everything that happened there remained as a silent warning about honor, respect, and legacy. The story of Noah and his sons was not just an isolated episode after the flood. It became a lens through which we can see eternal values, those that shape the human heart and define the destiny of families and nations. Amidst humanity's new beginning, 3 sons faced the same moment, but each chose a different path. And it was in those choices that blessings and curses were revealed. Cam, looking down on his father and telling everyone what he saw, showed a spirit of disrespect. His attitude dishonored his father and brought consequences not only for him, but for his descendants. Not because God is harsh, but because dishonor breaks the principles that keep life balanced. A lack of respect within the family affects generations. Shem and Japheth, on the other hand, showed that even in difficult situations, the heart can incline toward good. They acted with wisdom, compassion, and reverence. They protected their father's dignity when he was vulnerable, and God honored their actions. Their lineages were blessed, expanded, and integrated into the divine plan. What do we learn from all this? We learn that respect is not just a rule, it is a reflection of character. Honoring your father and mother is more than obedience. It is recognizing the value of authority, even when it fails. Everyone makes mistakes, even the righteous. But how we respond to the mistakes of others reveals who we really are. In the Christian life, we are constantly called to protect, cover, restore, not expose. The world values criticism and judgment, but God values care and honor. And that honor begins at home, with parents, with elders, with leaders. Honoring does not mean always agreeing. It means not hurting unnecessarily, not ridiculing, not tarnishing what can still be restored. This story invites us to examine our daily gestures. Are we among those who expose or those who cover with grace? The world is watching. But more importantly, God sees the heart, and the words he releases over us are deeply connected to the choices we make in secret. May we be like Shem and Japheth, men and women who understand the value of honor. And may we, through our silent gestures, be instruments of blessing for generations to come. If you enjoyed Cam's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming adversity, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, we will explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.